The dusty trail stretched ahead like a ribbon of dried blood under the brutal Dakota sun, and Yates Garrison had been riding it alone for 3 days when he spotted her saddling a paint mare outside Fort Pierre, South Dakota, her hands moving with the kind of efficiency that told him she knew exactly what she was doing with leather and horse. It was late spring of 1878, and Yates had signed on to help drive a small herd of 50 cattle north to Sioux Falls for a rancher named Edmund Barrett, who had broken his leg falling off a barn roof the week before the scheduled drive. The job was simple enough, straightforward work that would pay him enough to finally buy that piece of land he had been eyeing near the Big Sioux River. What he had not expected was Barrett's daughter showing up at dawn with her own horse, her own rifle, and a determined set to her jaw that brooked no argument. "Name's Clara Sutton," she said, extending a gloved hand. "My stepfather says you might need help with the drive." Yates took her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that marked her as someone who worked for a living. She stood about 5'6", with auburn hair braided tight against her head and eyes the color of creek water in summer. She wore men's riding pants and a leather vest over a cotton shirt, practical clothes for the trail. He figured her for around 22, maybe 23, which put her close to his own 27 years. "Edmund said he was sending help," Yates replied, releasing her hand. "Didn't specify what kind." "The kind that can ride, rope, and shoot if needed," Clara said without a trace of defensiveness. "I grew up on these plains. My mother died when I was 12, and my real father ran cattle until consumption took him 4 years back. Edmund married my mother when I was 10, treated me like his own. I have been working cattle since I could sit a horse." Yates studied her for a long moment, weighing his options. The truth was he did need help. 50 head was manageable alone if everything went perfectly, but things never went perfectly on a cattle drive. Weather could turn, cattle could spook, rivers could run high. Having another experienced hand would make the 60-mile journey from Fort Pierre to Sioux Falls considerably easier. "Can you ride point?" he asked. "Can you keep up?" she shot back, and there was a flash of something in her eyes that made his chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. They set out within the hour, pushing the cattle north along the Missouri River before they would turn east toward Sioux Falls. Clara rode point beside him, her paint mare moving with smooth precision as they guided the lead cattle. The morning air was cool, but Yates knew the afternoon would bring heat that could shimmer the horizon into waves of illusion. By mile 5, Yates realized she had not exaggerated her abilities. She anticipated the cattle's movements, positioning herself to guide rather than force, reading the herd like a gambler reading cards. When a young steer tried to break away, she was there before Yates could react, turning the animal back with practiced ease. By mile 10, something had shifted inside him. It was not just her competence, though that impressed him. It was the way she sat her horse, comfortable in her own skin and unafraid of the vast openness around them. It was the way she called out warnings about gopher holes and loose rocks without condescension, just matter-of-fact observation. It was the laugh she gave when a calf tried to nurse from her mare, and she had to gently push it back toward its mother. That laugh was like cold water on a hot day, refreshing and necessary. He was in trouble and he knew it. "You get much resistance?" he asked as they paused to let the cattle drink from a creek. "Doing work like this, I mean." Clara dismounted and stretched her back. "More than I should, less than I expected. Most men figure I cannot do it until they see me do it. Then they either respect it or resent it. Edmund always respected it, said my mother would have wanted me to be capable, not decorative." "Your stepfather's a wise man," Yates said, swinging down from his own horse, a bay gelding named Copper. "My mother was the same way, taught me and my sisters to handle ourselves. Ma always said the frontier does not care about your gender, only your grit. Sisters? Clara asked, leading her mare to the water. 3 of them, all younger, Molly, Sarah, and Beth. They are back in Kansas with Ma and my father. He runs a feed store in Abilene now. I send money when I can. Yates pulled off his hat and ran a hand through dark hair matted with sweat. What about you? Any siblings? None that lived, Clara said quietly. My mother lost 2 babies before they drew breath. I think that's part of why she got sick. Grief has a way of weakening the body. They rode through the afternoon in companionable silence, punctuated by occasional conversation about the land, the cattle, and the weather. Yates found himself watching her more than he should, noting the way she moved with the rhythm of her horse, the way strands of auburn hair escaped her braid to curl against her neck, the way she seemed to belong to this landscape, in a way few people did. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they found a suitable spot to make camp near a cottonwood grove. The cattle were tired enough to settle easily, and Yates and Clara worked together to build a fire and prepare a simple meal of beans, bacon, and coffee. 60 miles in 3 days, Clara said, sitting on her bedroll and wrapping her hands around a tin cup of coffee. That's the plan. Roughly, Yates confirmed. Could push them faster, but no point in running weight off them. Barrett wants them delivered healthy. Edmund's particular about that, Clara agreed. Says a rancher's reputation is only as good as the stock he sells. Yates poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral upward into the darkening sky. Can I ask you something? You can ask. I might not answer. Why did you want to come on this drive? Seems like there would be easier ways to spend 3 days. Clara was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the flames. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. Because I am tired of being left behind. Every time there is real work to be done, important work, the men ride out and the women stay home to wait and worry. I am capable. I am skilled. And I will not spend my life watching from windows while the world moves past me. She looked at him then, her eyes reflecting firelight. Does that make sense? More than you know, Yates said. I have seen plenty of women who could outride and outshoot the men who told them to stay home. My sister Molly once tracked a mountain lion that had been killing our chickens, and she did not come home until she had dealt with it. She was 16. I would like to meet your sister Molly, Clara said with a smile. She would like you, Yates replied, and meant it. The thought surprised him with its implications. The idea of introducing Clara to his family, of there being a future beyond these 60 miles. He had known her for less than a day, and yet something about her presence felt both new and familiar, like coming home to a place he had never been. They took turns keeping watch that night, Yates taking the first shift while Clara slept rolled in her blanket near the fire. He watched her in the flickering light, the steady rise and fall of her breathing, and felt a fierce protectiveness surge through him that had nothing to do with this being a job and everything to do with something he did not yet have words for. When he woke her for her shift, their hands touched briefly as she took the rifle from him, and the contact sent a jolt through him like touching a lightning rod. Sleep well, she said softly, and he did, better than he had in months. The second day brought harder riding. They had to cross the Bad River, which ran higher than Yates had hoped thanks to late spring snowmelt from the Black Hills. The cattle balked at the water, sensing the current's strength, and it took both of them working in tandem to get the herd moving across. Clara rode into the water first, her mare picking careful footing on the rocky bottom, encouraging the lead cattle to follow. Yates brought up the rear, pushing stragglers and keeping an eye out for any animals that might lose their footing. The water ran chest-high on the horses in the deepest part, cold enough to steal breath, and Yates saw Clara gasp as it soaked through her clothes. One of the calves panicked midstream, bawling in fear as the current threatened to sweep it downstream. Without hesitation, Clara turned her mare and pushed through the water toward the struggling animal. She leaned down from her saddle, grabbing the calf by its scruff with surprising strength, and half dragged, half guided it toward the far bank. By the time the entire herd was safely across, both Yates and Clara were soaked and shivering despite the warm air. They kept moving for another hour to put distance between themselves and the river, then stopped to let the cattle graze and dry out. "That was good work back there," Yates said, dismounting and immediately starting to gather wood for a fire. The wet clothes would dry faster with heat, and they both needed to warm up. "That calf was too young to lose," Clara replied, her teeth chattering slightly. "Its mother would have grieved." The simple empathy in her statement struck Yates as profoundly as anything she could have said. This was not just someone who knew cattle as commodities. This was someone who understood them as living creatures, who saw the connections between mother and calf, who valued life beyond its market price. "You should change into dry clothes," he said, turning his back and busying himself with the fire. "I will keep watch." "Thank you," she said quietly, and he heard the rustle of fabric as she moved to her saddlebags. They sat by the fire as the afternoon wore on, their wet clothes drying on rocks, talking about everything and nothing. Clara told him about her childhood on the plains, about learning to read from her mother's Bible and learning to track from her father. She told him about the winter of 1873, when blizzards had killed half their cattle, and her father had worked himself nearly to death trying to save the rest. She told him about Edmund, who had courted her mother with patience and genuine affection, who had never tried to replace her father but had carved out his own place in their family. Yates told her about growing up in Kansas, about driving his first herd at 15, about the year he had spent in Texas learning from Mexican vaqueros. He told her about the land he wanted to buy, 160 acres with good water and better grass, a place where he could build something lasting. "Why Sioux Falls?" Clara asked. "Why settle in Dakota territory instead of going back to Kansas?" "Because Kansas is settled," Yates said. "The good land is taken, divided up among families who have been there for decades. Out here, there is still opportunity. A man can make something of himself if he is willing to work for it." He paused. "A woman too, I reckon." "You reckon right," Clara said with a slight smile. "Though it's harder for women. A single woman cannot file a homestead claim in many places. She needs a husband for that." "That's a fool law," Yates said flatly. "Plenty of women could work a claim as well as any man." "Plenty of women do work claims," Clara corrected. "They just do not get the credit for it. They do it in their husbands' names or their father's names or their brothers' names." "Is that what you want?" Yates asked, surprising himself with the boldness of the question. "To work a claim?" Clara looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "What I want is to be my own person, to make my own choices, to not be limited by what society thinks is proper for my sex." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "But I also want what anyone wants, companionship, partnership. Someone to build a life with who sees me as an equal, not a servant or a decoration." "That does not seem like too much to ask," Yates said quietly. "You would be surprised how rare it is," Clara replied. They rode into the sunset, pushing the cattle another few miles before making camp. Yates shot a rabbit, and Clara prepared it with wild onions she found growing nearby. They ate as stars began to puncture the darkening sky, and Yates found himself memorizing the moment, the taste of the food, the crackle of the fire, the way Clara's face looked in the golden light. "Can I tell you something?" he said suddenly. "Yes. Back at mile 10, maybe mile 11, I realized something." He set down his plate and looked at her directly. "I realized that I did not want this drive to end, that 60 miles suddenly seemed far too short." Clara's breath caught, and in the firelight he saw color rise in her cheeks. "Yates, I know it's fast. I know we just met. But I have met a lot of people in my life, and I have never met anyone who felt like you do, like someone I could build something real with. Like someone I could trust with everything I am." The words tumbled out, honest and unpolished. "I think you are the one, Clara, and I think I knew it by mile 10. She stared at him, her eyes wide and glistening. "How can you be sure? How can you know something like that so quickly?" "I cannot explain it," Yates admitted. "But I have learned to trust my instincts. They have kept me alive this long, and every instinct I have is telling me that you are something special. That if I let you ride away at the end of this drive without saying something, I will regret it for the rest of my life." Clara stood abruptly and walked a few paces away, her back to him. Yates felt his heart hammering in his chest, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake, if he had misread everything between them. Then she turned around, and there were tears on her cheeks. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have been trying to tell myself I am being foolish, that it is just the closeness of the trail, the shared work. But it's more than that. I look at you and I see someone I could trust, someone I could build a life with, someone who would not try to make me smaller to make himself feel bigger." Yates was on his feet in an instant, crossing the distance between them. He stopped just short of touching her, giving her space to back away if she wanted. She did not back away. Instead, she reached up and laid her palm against his chest, over his heart. "I am afraid," she said softly. "I am afraid of being wrong. I am afraid of losing myself." "I would never ask you to lose yourself," Yates said, covering her hand with his own. "I want you exactly as you are, strong and capable and fierce. I want a partner, not a possession." She looked up at him, and he saw the moment she made her decision. She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and tentative at first, then with growing certainty. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, feeling like the world had shifted on its axis and finally clicked into proper alignment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara laughed shakily. "This is madness. The best kind," Yates agreed. They sat together by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and talked late into the night. They talked about dreams and fears, about the lives they wanted to build and the challenges they would face. They talked about the practical realities of settling in Sioux Falls, of buying land and building a home. They talked about children and cattle, about harsh winters and golden summers. "Edmund will have questions," Clara said eventually. "He'll want to make sure you are serious, that you will treat me well." "I will answer any question he has," Yates promised. "And I will spend every day proving that I am serious about you. My father, my real father, used to say that love was not just a feeling," Clara said quietly. "He said it was a choice you made every day, a commitment to show up, to do the work, to be present even when things got hard." "Your father was a wise man," Yates said, "and he raised a remarkable daughter." They kissed again, longer this time, with the kind of passion that spoke of futures and promises. When Clara finally pulled away to go to her bedroll, Yates felt bereft, but also more certain than he had ever been about anything. This woman, this fierce and capable woman, was going to be his wife. He knew it the way he knew the sun would rise, inevitable and right. The third day dawned clear and bright. They were 20 miles from Sioux Falls now, close enough that they could afford to take their time, let the cattle graze and rest. Yates and Clara rode side by side, their legs occasionally brushing, small touches that felt enormous in their significance. "When we get to Sioux Falls," Yates said, I am going to speak to Edmund. Ask his permission to court you properly." "You have my permission," Clara said with a smile. "That should count for something." "It counts for everything," Yates agreed. "But I want to do this right. I want your family to know that I respect you and them." Around midday, they spotted smoke on the horizon. Yates felt his muscles tense, his hand moving automatically toward his rifle. Smoke could mean many things, not all of them good. "Could be a settlement," Clara said, shading her eyes. "Or travelers." "Could be," Yates agreed, but he did not relax. "We should be cautious." As they drew closer, the source of the smoke became clear. A wagon was stopped beside the trail, one wheel broken and listing badly. A family stood beside it, a man, a woman, and 3 small children. The man waved when he saw Yates and Clara approaching. "Thank God," the man called out. "We have been stuck here since yesterday. Do you have tools?" "Our wheel broke, and we cannot fix it without the right equipment." Yates and Clara exchanged a glance, a whole conversation passing between them in that look. They could not leave a family stranded on the plains, not with children, but stopping would delay their arrival in Sioux Falls. "We will help," Clara said firmly, and Yates nodded agreement. They spent the next several hours working on the wagon wheel while the cattle grazed nearby. The family, named Henderson, were heading north from Nebraska to try their luck farming near Pierre. The father, John Henderson, had basic tools but not what was needed to properly fix the broken wheel. Yates had to fashion a temporary splint using spare wood from the wagon bed and leather strips from his own saddlebags. Clara entertained the children, teaching them how to identify animal tracks and telling them stories about life on the plains. Yates watched her with the little ones, saw the natural ease with which she interacted with them, and felt his certainty deepen. She would be an amazing mother when and if they decided to have children. "Cannot thank you enough," John Henderson said as Yates finished securing the repaired wheel. "We were beginning to think we might have to abandon the wagon and walk." "No one should have to do that," Yates said. "The repair should hold until you reach the next town. Get a proper wheelwright to look at it when you can." Mrs. Henderson insisted on giving them food as thanks, pressing a cloth-wrapped parcel of cornbread and dried apples into Clara's hands. "You are doing the Lord's work," she said earnestly. "Helping strangers in need." "Just doing what's right," Clara said, but she accepted the gift with grace. As they rode away, waving goodbye to the Henderson family, Yates reached over and took Clara's hand. "You were wonderful with those children." "They were sweet," Clara said. "Reminded me of how much I want my own someday. Not too many, but enough to fill a house with noise and love." "How many is enough?" Yates asked. 3, maybe 4, Clara said thoughtfully. "Enough that they have companionship, but not so many that we cannot provide for them all properly." "What about you?" "I always figured I would want children eventually," Yates said. "Never gave much thought to the specific number. But seeing you with those little ones today, I found myself imagining what our children might be like, if they would have your eyes or your stubbornness." "My stubbornness," Clara laughed. "I think you have plenty of your own." "Then they will be doubly stubborn," Yates said with a grin. "Heaven help us." They made camp that night only 10 miles from Sioux Falls. The cattle were in good condition. The drive had gone smoothly despite the delays, and Yates felt a sense of satisfaction mixed with melancholy. Tomorrow this would be over, and while he had Clara's word that she felt the same way he did, part of him feared that returning to civilization would change things somehow. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked as they sat by the fire. "Tomorrow," Yates admitted. "What happens after we deliver the cattle?" "What happens is you talk to Edmund, and then you court me properly, and then you marry me," Clara said matter-of-factly. "That is, if you still want to." "If I still want to," Yates repeated incredulously. Clara, I have thought of little else for 2 days. But what about you? What if you change your mind once we are back in town, around other people? Clara shifted closer to him, taking his hand in both of hers. Listen to me, Yates Garrison. I am not the kind of woman who makes declarations lightly. When I say I want to build a life with you, I mean it. When I say I think you might be the best man I have ever met, I mean that too. Tomorrow will not change how I feel, neither will next week or next month or next year. I love you, Yates said, the words simple and profound. I know it's too soon to say it, but I do. I love you. It's not too soon, Clara whispered. Because I love you too. I love your kindness and your integrity. I love the way you see me as capable instead of fragile. I love the way you make me laugh and the way you listen when I talk. I love you, Yates. They kissed under a canopy of stars, holding each other close, and Yates felt a completeness he had never experienced before. This was what he had been searching for without knowing it. This woman, this connection, this sense of coming home. Tell me about the land you want to buy, Clara said later, nestled against his chest. It's about 5 miles east of Sioux Falls, Yates said, stroking her hair. 160 acres with a creek running through it, good grass, some timber for building. I have been saving for 3 years now, and after this job, I will have enough for the down payment. Will you build a house, eventually? Probably start with a small cabin, something practical, then add on as we need more space. He paused. I had been planning to do it alone, but now I cannot imagine doing any of it without you. Then you will not have to, Clara said simply. We will build it together. They talked until exhaustion claimed them, then slept curled together on a single bedroll, propriety be damned. This far from town, with only the cattle as witnesses, they could afford this intimacy, this closeness that sustained them both. The final day of the drive dawned with a pink and gold sunrise that promised heat later. They were both eager now, ready to complete the job and begin the next chapter of their lives. The cattle seemed to sense the nearness of journey's end, moving with less resistance than they had shown in previous days. As the buildings of Sioux Falls came into view, rising from the prairie like a promise, Yates felt his pulse quicken. They had ridden 60 miles together, and somewhere around mile 10, his entire life had changed direction. Now he just had to hope that Edmund Barrett was a reasonable man. They drove the cattle to the stockyards on the east side of town, where a buyer named Thornton was waiting to inspect them. He walked through the herd with a critical eye, checking teeth and hooves, feeling flanks and shoulders. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, he nodded. Good stock, Thornton said. Barrett always delivers quality. I will have my men pen them and we will complete the transaction tomorrow. You are Garrison. I am, Yates confirmed. Barrett sent word you might be doing the delivery. Said you were reliable. He was right. Thornton counted out payment from a leather pouch, more money than Yates had seen in months. That covers the agreed price plus a bonus for timely delivery. Tell Barrett I will do business with him again anytime. I will tell him, Yates said, pocketing the money carefully. Clara had already started the ride toward her family's property outside town, and Yates followed on Copper. His stomach was in knots now, nervous in a way he had not been even during the worst moments of the drive. This mattered. Edmund's approval mattered, not because Yates would not marry Clara without it, but because he wanted to start their life together with family blessing rather than family conflict. The Barrett ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy house, a solid barn, and corrals that spoke of competent care. Edmund Barrett himself was sitting on the porch, his broken leg propped on a stool when they rode up. He was a man in his late 40s with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent his life outdoors. Clara, he called out, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God. I have been worrying about you for 3 days straight, even though I knew you were perfectly capable." "The drive went smoothly," Clara said, dismounting and climbing the porch steps to kiss Edmund's cheek. "Yates was an excellent partner. We delivered the cattle in good condition and got full payment plus a bonus." "Glad to hear it," Edmund said, but his eyes were on Yates now, assessing. "Garrison, come up here where I can see you properly." Yates tied Copper to the rail and climbed the steps, acutely aware of how much he probably looked like a dusty trail hand. "Sir, I need to speak with you about something important." "I had a feeling you might," Edmund said dryly. "Clara, would you give us a few minutes?" "No," Clara said firmly. "Whatever Yates has to say, he can say it with me here. I'm not a child to be sent away while the men talk about my future." Edmund looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Fair enough. Sit down, both of you." Yates remained standing, feeling that some things needed to be said on your feet. "Mr. Barrett, I want your permission to court your daughter with the intention of marriage. I know we have only known each other 3 days, but I have never been more certain of anything. Clara is the finest woman I have ever met, and I want to spend my life proving that I am worthy of her." Edmund was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Yates and Clara. "3 days," he finally said. "That's a mighty short time to be talking about marriage." "It is," Yates agreed. "But sometimes you just know. My parents knew after 2 weeks. My grandmother knew after one conversation. I am not saying we will rush into anything. I will court Clara properly, give her time to be absolutely certain, but I wanted you to know my intentions from the start." "What about your situation?" Edmund asked. "Do you have the means to support a wife?" "I have money saved to buy land east of here," Yates said. 160 acres. After this job, I have enough for the down payment and initial supplies. I am a hard worker, and I have experience with cattle, horses, and farming. I will not make Clara rich, but I will make sure she is provided for." "Clara does not need to be rich," Edmund said, "but she does need to be respected and valued. She is not like other women, Garrison. She is independent and strong-minded. She needs a man who will appreciate that, not try to break it." "I do appreciate it," Yates said. "It's one of the things I love most about her. I do not want a woman who will walk behind me. I want a partner who will walk beside me." Edmund looked at Clara. "What do you think about all this?" "I think Yates is the best man I have ever met," Clara said clearly. "I think he sees me for who I am and loves me because of it, not despite it. I think I want to marry him, and while I would like your blessing, I will marry him regardless if necessary." Edmund's eyebrows rose. "That plain, is it?" "That plain," Clara confirmed. A slow smile spread across Edmund's face. "Then I suppose I would be a fool to stand in the way. You have my blessing, Garrison, but you hurt her, and broken leg or no broken leg, I will come after you." "You will not need to," Yates promised. "I would rather cut off my own arm than hurt her." "Good," Edmund said. "Now, Clara, go tell your mother we have a guest for dinner, and that we have a wedding to start planning." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and happiness. Yates officially purchased the land east of town, and with Edmund's help and Clara's input, began planning the cabin that would become their first home. They attended church together on Sundays, walked through town in the evenings, and spent every possible moment getting to know each other even better. Yates met Clara's mother, Anne, a quiet woman who had clearly passed on her strength to her daughter. Anne welcomed Yates with warm approval, telling him privately that she had never seen Clara so happy. He also met the handful of people in Sioux Falls who constituted Clara's circle of friends, women who eyed him with protective suspicion until they saw how he treated Clara, after which they welcomed him as well. Clara helped Yates select lumber and supplies, rode out to the land with him to mark where the cabin should sit, and drew sketches of how she wanted the interior arranged. They worked together with a seamless efficiency that reminded Yates of those 3 days on the trail, when they had functioned as a perfectly coordinated team. "I want to marry you in August," Clara said one evening as they sat on the half-built frame of what would become their cabin. "That gives us 2 months to finish the house and make preparations." "August sounds perfect," Yates agreed, "though I would marry you tomorrow if you wanted." "I want to do it properly," Clara said. "I want a real wedding with our families and friends there to witness it. I want to wear a nice dress and dance at the celebration afterward. I want to remember this day for the rest of my life." "Then that is what we will do," Yates said, pulling her close. "Whatever you want, I will make it happen." In late June, Yates received a telegram from his family in Kansas. His mother, father, and 3 sisters were planning to make the journey to Sioux Falls for the wedding. The news made Clara light up with excitement. She had been anxious about meeting Yates's family, worried they might resent her for taking their son and brother away from Kansas. "They are going to love you," Yates assured her. "Especially Molly. I told you about her, remember, the one who tracked the mountain lion." "I remember," Clara said. "I am still nervous." "You faced down 60 miles of trail without flinching," Yates pointed out. "You can handle meeting my family." When the Garrison family arrived in late July, Clara's fears proved groundless. Yates's mother, Margaret, embraced her warmly and immediately began discussing wedding preparations. His father, Thomas, shook her hand with gruff approval and told Yates he had chosen well. And his sisters, particularly Molly, took to Clara instantly. "I told Ma you found someone special," Molly said, linking her arm through Clara's. "But I did not realize just how special. You rode point on a cattle drive. That's incredible." "Your brother was not bad company," Clara said with a smile. "He must not have been," Molly laughed. "You are marrying him." The days leading up to the wedding were filled with preparation and celebration. Anne and Margaret worked together to sew Clara's wedding dress, a simple but elegant cream-colored gown with small pearl buttons. Edmund, his leg finally healed, helped Yates finish the cabin, putting the final touches on the roof and windows. The Barrett and Garrison families came together with the easy warmth of people who recognized kindred spirits. On the morning of August 15th, 1878, Yates stood in the small church in Sioux Falls with sweat dampening his collar and his heart pounding like a drum. His father stood beside him as best man, and behind them sat every person they had invited, neighbors and friends who had come to witness this union. Then Clara appeared at the back of the church on Edmund's arm, and Yates forgot how to breathe. She was radiant in her cream dress, her auburn hair curled and pinned with small white flowers. But more than her beauty, it was the look in her eyes when she met his gaze that undid him. Pure joy and certainty, love and promise. Edmund walked her down the aisle and placed her hand in Yates's with a quiet, "Take care of her." "Always," Yates promised. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through all the challenges life would bring. When the minister finally said, "You may kiss your bride," Yates cupped Clara's face in his hands and kissed her with all the love he felt, while their families cheered and applauded. The celebration afterward was held at the Barrett Ranch, with tables laden with food and music provided by a fiddle player from town. Yates and Clara danced together as the sun set, moving to the music and laughing, completely wrapped up in each other. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Garrison?" Yates asked, spinning her gently. "Like everything I ever wanted," Clara replied. "Like coming home." They spent their wedding night in their new cabin, lying together in the bed they had built with their own hands, wrapped in quilts sewn by their mothers. Yates traced the curve of Clara's cheek, marveling at the reality of her presence beside him. "I love you," he said for the 1,000th time. "I love you too," Clara whispered. "And I will love you at mile 10, at mile 60, and at every mile after for the rest of our lives." They made love slowly and tenderly, learning each other's bodies with patience and care. Afterward, Clara lay with her head on Yates's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You remember what you said on the second night of the drive?" she asked. "About knowing I was the one." "I remember every word I have ever said to you," Yates replied. "I knew too," Clara said softly. "Maybe not at mile 10 exactly, but certainly by the time we crossed the Bad River. I knew I would never meet anyone else who made me feel the way you do, safe and strong and seen." "You are all of those things," Yates said, "and you make me better just by existing." They fell asleep wrapped together, the beginning of a pattern that would continue for decades. The years that followed were filled with the hard work and simple joys of building a life together. Yates and Clara ran cattle on their land, gradually expanding their herd and their property. They worked side by side every day, Clara never content to stay in the house when there was work to be done outside. She rode fence line, helped with brandings, and became known in the area as one of the finest horse handlers in the region. In the spring of 1880, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Yates was simultaneously terrified and elated, hovering over her with concern until she threatened to lock him in the barn if he did not stop treating her like she was made of glass. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she told him firmly. "I am healthy and strong. I will be fine." "I know that," Yates said, "but that does not stop me from worrying." Their first child, a son they named James Thomas after Yates's father, was born in November during the first snowfall of the year. Yates held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the tiny perfection of him. Clara watched with exhausted satisfaction, proud of what they had created together. James was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Elizabeth Ann after both their mothers, though they called her Lizzie from the start. She had Clara's auburn hair and Yates's dark eyes, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her mother everywhere, determined to learn everything Clara could teach her. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, allowing them to build an addition onto the cabin and purchase more livestock. Edmund and Anne were frequent visitors, doting grandparents who spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly. The Garrison family made the journey from Kansas whenever they could, and Molly eventually moved to Sioux Falls herself, finding work as a schoolteacher and remaining close to her beloved brother and sister-in-law. In 1885, Clara gave birth to their third child, another son they named William Edmund. He was a quiet baby, watchful and calm, and as he grew, he showed an aptitude for working with animals that surpassed even his parents' skills. Yates and Clara aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They had disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or misunderstanding, but they had learned early how to talk through problems rather than let them fester. The foundation they had built during those first 3 days on the trail remained solid beneath everything else. "You ever regret it?" Clara asked one evening in the spring of 1892, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their children were grown now, James courting a girl from town, Lizzie working alongside her mother on the ranch, and William apprenticing with a veterinarian in Sioux Falls. "Regret what?" Yates asked, though he knew what she meant. "Moving so fast, deciding to marry me after 3 days." Yates took her hand, noting the calluses they both bore from decades of hard work, the wear and tear that came with a life fully lived. "Not for a single second. Best decision I ever made. I knew at mile 10 and I was right." You were right, Clara agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. Though I still think Mile 11 had something to do with it. Mile 11, Mile 10, what's the difference? Yates laughed. Point is, somewhere on that trail I found everything I would ever need. They sat together as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors that had lit their first sunset together 14 years earlier. The land they had built on, the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, it was all more than Yates had ever dreamed possible. In 1894, James married his sweetheart, a practical young woman named Sarah who reminded both Yates and Clara of Clara herself. They built a house on a portion of the Garrison land and began running their own small herd. Lizzie showed no interest in marriage yet, declaring that she was perfectly content working the ranch and had yet to meet a man who did not bore her within 5 minutes. She is just like you, Yates told Clara, waiting for someone worthy. If that's what she wants, I support it, Clara said. Though I hope she does not have to wait as long as I did. I was beginning to think worthy men were a myth before I met you. William finished his veterinary training and opened a practice in Sioux Falls, becoming one of the most sought-after animal doctors in the region. He remained unmarried, claiming that his work was his wife and his patients were his children, which made both Clara and Yates smile with understanding. Edmund Barrett passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1896, having lived long enough to see his stepdaughter happy and his grandchildren thriving. At the funeral, Clara stood with dry eyes but a heavy heart, speaking about the man who had stepped into her father's shoes with grace and love. Yates held her hand throughout, a steady presence that sustained her through grief. Anne Barrett followed her husband 2 years later, and Clara mourned the loss of both parents within such a short span. But she found comfort in her own family, in Yates's unwavering support, and in the knowledge that Edmund and Anne had both died knowing their daughter was loved and cared for. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. Yates and Clara, now in their mid-40s, watched as Sioux Falls grew from a frontier town into a proper city. Automobiles began appearing on streets that had once known only horses and wagons. Electricity came to town, though the Garrison Ranch remained lit by lamplight for several more years. The world is changing, Clara observed one evening. It is, Yates agreed, but some things stay the same: love, family, hard work. Those things do not change just because we have electric lights and motor cars. In 1903, Lizzie finally met her match in a young rancher named Robert who treated her as an equal partner rather than a prize to be won. Their courtship was stormy and passionate, filled with spirited debates and mutual respect. When Robert asked for Lizzie's hand, he did it while she was shoulder-deep in hay, feeding the horses. She said yes without hesitation. "He reminds me of someone," Clara said to Yates after meeting Robert properly. "Who?" Yates asked innocently. You fool," Clara laughed. "He looks at Lizzie the way you looked at me on that cattle drive, like she hung the moon." "Then he is a smart man," Yates said. "And Lizzie is lucky to have found him." The years continued to pass, marked by births and deaths, successes and challenges. William eventually married a widow with 2 young children and became a devoted stepfather. James and Sarah had 4 children who ran wild across the Garrison property, filling the air with laughter and noise. Lizzie and Robert built their own ranch and had twin daughters who inherited their mother's fierce independence. Through it all, Yates and Clara remained each other's constant. They worked the ranch together well into their 60s, slowing down only when age and arthritis demanded it. They handed over most of the daily operations to James and Lizzie, but still spent every day outside, checking fences, visiting cattle, and simply being together. 60 miles, Clara said one afternoon as they rode across their property, taking a leisurely tour of the land they had built their lives on. "That is how far we rode together on that first drive. 60 miles that changed everything," Yates agreed. "Though really, it was just the first 10 that mattered." "Mile 10, Clara smiled. "When you knew." "When I knew," Yates confirmed. "Best mile of my life." They reached the creek that ran through their property, the same creek that had been one of the selling points when Yates first saw this land 40-something years earlier. They dismounted and sat on the bank, watching the water flow past. "If you could go back," Clara asked, "and tell your younger self anything, what would you say?" Yates considered the question carefully. "I would tell him to trust his instincts. That when he meets a woman saddling a paint mare outside Fort Pierre, he should pay attention to what his heart is telling him, because that woman is going to be his whole world." "I would tell my younger self the same thing," Clara said softly. "To not be afraid of moving fast when it is right. To not second-guess the feeling that told me this dusty cowboy was different from every other man I had ever met." "No regrets?" Yates asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Clara said firmly. "You gave me everything I ever wanted: partnership, respect, love. Children and grandchildren. A life fully lived. How could I have regrets about any of that? I gave you hard work and calloused hands," Yates said wryly. "I already had those," Clara pointed out. "What you gave me was someone to share them with. Someone who never tried to make me into something I was not. Someone who loved me for exactly who I am." They kissed beside the creek, as they had kissed 1,000 times before and would kiss 1,000 times more. The passion had mellowed into something deeper and steadier, but no less real. This was the love that lasted, built on shared experiences and mutual respect, on laughter and tears, on ordinary days and extraordinary moments. As they grew older, Yates and Clara became the family matriarch and patriarch, the ones everyone turned to for advice and wisdom. They celebrated anniversaries surrounded by children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. They told stories about the old days, about cattle drives and frontier life, about the Wild West that was slowly fading into history. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, the family threw a massive celebration. The ranch was filled with people, 3 generations of Garrisons and Suttons, and all the friends they had accumulated over the decades. Yates, now 77 with gray hair and a weathered face, stood up to make a speech. 50 years ago," he said, his voice still strong despite his age, "I rode out of Fort Pierre with a herd of cattle and a woman I had just met. By mile 10, I knew my life had changed forever. Clara was unlike anyone I had ever met, fierce and capable and completely unafraid. She rode point beside me for 60 miles, and somewhere on that trail, I fell completely in love, not just with her beauty, though she was and is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, but with her spirit, her strength, her absolute certainty about who she was and what she wanted. I asked her to marry me after 3 days, which seemed crazy then and seems crazier now. But it was the sanest thing I ever did. Clara, you have been my partner, my love, my best friend for 50 years. You have given me children and grandchildren, a life beyond anything I could have imagined. And if I could go back to that morning outside Fort Pierre and do it all again, I would not change a single thing." There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Clara stood and kissed her husband, the applause ringing out across the prairie. They danced together as the sun set, moving slowly to music provided by their grandchildren, still perfectly in sync after 50 years. "I love you," Clara whispered. "At mile 10, at mile 60, and at every mile in between and beyond." "I love you too," Yates replied. "Forever." They lived several more good years together, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1932 at the age of 81, with Clara holding his hand. His last words were, "See you down the trail, my love." Clara followed him 2 years later, dying quietly in the house they had built together, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had all benefited from the love story that began with a cattle drive and 60 miles of prairie. Her last words were, "I knew by mile 10 too." They were buried side by side in the cemetery outside Sioux Falls, their headstones simple but inscribed with words that told their story. He rode beside her for 60 miles. She rode beside him for a lifetime. The ranch they built continued on through their descendants, passed down through the generations. The cabin they lived in became a family landmark, preserved and cherished. And the story of how Yates and Clara met, how they fell in love in just 3 days and 60 miles, became a family legend told and retold, a testament to the power of knowing when you have found the right person. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually visit that land, walking the ground their ancestors had worked, and feel the presence of that great love story. They would understand that some things are meant to be, that sometimes you do know at mile 10, and that the best love stories are the ones built not just on passion but on partnership, respect, and the willingness to ride point together through whatever life brings. The Wild West faded into history, but the love between Yates Garrison and Clara Sutton remained timeless, a reminder that the most important journeys are not measured in miles but in moments, not in distance but in depth. They had ridden 60 miles together on that first drive, but they had traveled a lifetime side by side, and that was the journey that truly mattered. In the end, it was not about how quickly they fell in love or how fast they decided to marry. It was about the 50-plus years they spent proving that the instinct they felt at mile 10 was absolutely right, about the family they built and the legacy they left, about two people who found each other against all odds and chose each other every single day until death finally parted them. That was the real story, the one that mattered, the one that would endure long after the prairie grass reclaimed the trails they once rode, and the Wild West became nothing more than fading photographs and cherished memories. And somewhere in the vast expanse of whatever comes after, Yates and Clara rode on together, still side by side, still perfectly matched, eternal partners on an endless trail. Because some loves are too powerful to be contained by a single lifetime, some connections too deep to be severed by something as mundane as death. They had promised each other forever, and they had meant it, and the universe itself had honored that promise. The story of the cowboy who knew by mile 10 and the woman who rode point beside him for 60 miles became more than just a family tale. It became a symbol of what love could be when two people met as equals, when respect and passion combined, when partnership was valued as much as romance. It became a reminder that sometimes the best decisions are made quickly, that instinct matters, and that when you know, you know. Their descendants would carry that legacy forward, seeking the same kind of love their great-grandparents had found, refusing to settle for anything less than the real thing. And occasionally, very occasionally, they would find it, recognizing it by the same signs that Yates had recognized in Clara all those years ago. Competence without arrogance, strength without harshness, independence combined with the willingness to build something together. The Wild West was gone, swept away by progress and time, but the values that Yates and Clara had lived by remained relevant. Hard work, integrity, loyalty, the courage to follow your heart even when it seemed reckless, the wisdom to recognize a once-in-a-lifetime connection when it appeared. These things did not change, regardless of whether you rode a horse or drove a car, whether you lit your home with lamps or electricity, whether you communicated by letter or telephone. And so the story lived on, passed down through generations, adapted and embellished but always true at its core. The cowboy who knew by mile 10. The woman who rode point beside him for 60 miles. The love that grew from respect and partnership into something that lasted beyond lifetimes. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth aspiring to. It was proof that magic existed, not in fairy tales but in real life, in the space between two people who saw each other truly and loved what they saw. The ranch lands eventually were subdivided as the family grew and spread, but one piece remained intact, passed down through the direct line of descendants. The cabin was maintained as a family heritage site, a place where weddings were held and anniversaries celebrated, where people came to remember where they came from and the love that started it all. On that land, if you stood very still on a quiet evening, you could almost hear the echo of hoofbeats, almost see two figures riding side by side across the prairie. Not ghosts, exactly, but something more like an imprint, the memory of a love so strong it had left its mark on the land itself. The cattle no longer grazed there, the fences were long gone, but the spirit of what Yates and Clara had built remained, testament to the enduring power of a love story that began with 60 miles and ended only with eternity. And that, perhaps, was the greatest legacy of all. Not the land or the money or even the descendants, important as those were, but the proof that real love existed, that it was possible to find your perfect match and build a life of meaning and joy together. In a world that often felt uncertain and chaotic, that was a message worth preserving, a story worth telling, a legacy worth honoring. Yates and Clara Garrison had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind something precious. The knowledge that sometimes, if you are very lucky and very brave, you can find everything you have ever wanted in 60 miles and know it by mile 10. And that is as close to magic as most people ever get in this world. The sun set over the Dakota prairie, painting the sky in the same oranges and golds that had colored so many sunsets throughout their lives. The land remembered, even if the people who walked it now did not always know the full story. The land remembered two young people falling in love on a cattle drive, remembered their first kiss under a canopy of stars, remembered the cabin they built, and the children they raised and the life they created together. The land remembered, and in remembering, kept their love alive for all the generations to come, a beacon of hope and possibility in a changing world. And if love stories have souls, then the soul of Yates and Clara's love remained woven into that prairie grass, into the soil they had worked, into the very air that moved across the plains. It remained as a blessing for those who came after, a whispered promise that true love was real, that partnership was possible, that you could find someone who saw you completely and loved you anyway. It remained as proof that the best journeys are the ones we take together, and that sometimes, just sometimes, a single mile can change absolutely everything.